We're back, Joe DeLeone, Ryan Roberts. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into the 2023 NFL Draft. We've had all of the evaluation events that have occurred. We've had the Senior Bowl, the East-West Shrine Game. We've had the NFL Combine, which means we've had the biggest cogs in what is the NFL Draft machine to help guys' draft stocks either increase or decrease. So today, the purpose of today's show is now with almost a little more than a month remaining until the NFL Draft kicks off, looking at the guys that have either had meteoric rises throughout this process since the start of the college football season or have completely fallen off the face of the earth as potential gems in this class. All that coming up on today's show. Ryan, how are you doing today?
Fantastic, man. Fantastic. This is it's a little bit of an awkward time of the year, I guess. You know, you got to through all the excitement of the All-Star games and then your combine and then your just pro days left, right? Pro days and the top 30 meetings that these players have. So it's a little bit of a downtime, I guess, finish up a couple evals and get ready for 2024. So can't wait.
Oh God, only you would bring up the 2024 NFL draft class on this show, but you are certainly right where we're in this weird intermediary period as we're finishing out and putting out most of our rankings, which is coming out on the NFL Draft Prospect Show. But in addition to that, we're waiting for the commotion to start back up, which probably won't come around until April, where we'll probably get some crazy trades. But nonetheless, Ryan, let's take a look back at this draft process. I want to start off with our first riser here, as we've had a lot of defensive linemen pop up onto the radar. And we've talked about at the beginning of this cycle guys who in this defensive line class were going to ascend and be big names, but we've had even more guys put themselves into the first round picture. I don't think we can have this discussion without talking about Adetomiwa Adebawore, the Northwestern defensive lineman who was an edge, is transitioning to defensive tackle and blew up the NFL Combine. He also dominated at the Senior Bowl. Adetomiwa Adebawore, man, who is very low to the ground at 6'1", 280 pounds, is a fast SOB, running a 4.49 40 at the NFL Combine, testing off the charts with his explosiveness numbers. After taking a look at Adetomiwa Adebawore, I get the hype, and I think that he's got the tools to be a day two pick. Everything that he brings to the table is very exciting because he, again, low to the ground, hard to block, but explosive, which could turn him into a problem at the next level.
I think his process of going to the Senior Bowl and deciding that I'm going to showcase my skills as an interior rusher opposed to an outside edge player was probably the best decision that Adetomiwa Adebawore made. Because, I mean, Joe, he was well-liked in NFL circles. He had draftable grades coming into the seasons playing defensive end for Northwestern because he is a gifted athlete. Ran 4.49 at the Combine, right, at 284 pounds. He has those long arms, 34-inch arms. So Northwestern left him on the edge because that's probably their best athlete on the defensive side of the football this last year. But he's only 6'1" and some change. He's sub 6'2", doesn't really have the height profile to play on the edge consistently. He goes to Mobile, and I mean, I love the fact that he was playing a lot interior, like mostly on the interior, because now I'm looking at him, I'm saying, on the next level, gain a couple more pounds. You are a starting level 3 tech at the next level with your ability to use your quickness to win quickly on reps, be a one-gap penetrator, that style. And also, you can play at the point of attack because you're strong into the knocks. You have really long arms. Adetomiwa Adebawore, I believe, has really found a home on the interior. Definitely not an edge setter consistently at the next level, but he can even play, I think, at times in an odd man front, maybe some 4-eye, maybe 5 in spurts, depending on the situation, right? Like, you can do all those type of things. Add all that together, man. Running 4.49, having a high 30 in the vert. This kid is an explosive athlete, a gifted athlete, and I think he's really found a home on the interior of this defensive line class in 2023.
By the way, whoever advised him, I don't know if it was his trainer, I don't know if it was maybe feedbacks from scouts, but whoever advised him to say, you're not really long enough to play edge, but your physical traits are going to make you a problem in the interior. Let's bulk you up a little bit. Let's bump you inside, and let's see you go to work. And the big thing for me, I've seen people talk about Adebawore and say, he doesn't really have and show these skills on film consistently, which makes sense because he was playing a position he's not going to play in the NFL. Right. There's also the other narrative that gets brought up with him is we don't have tape of him playing defensive tackle. So how do we make this determination of where he belongs in the draft? I'd argue, man, him showing up on short notice at the Senior Bowl and causing the problems that he did, he had a sneaky week. For the first couple of days, I told you this when I was there, I kept writing him down without writing his full name down. I'm just like, Northwestern defensive lineman, who the hell is this kid? I've never heard of him. Why is he constantly getting penetration, blowing up rushing plays? Who is this kid and why is he causing so many problems? And then he started to be one of those guys immediately. PFF starts talking about him and he is picked up and everyone is running with his name as a big riser in this class. But I give him a ton of credit for how quickly he made that transition. And again, whoever advised him to make that transition is deserving of whatever paycheck they're getting.
I mean, because if you go back to the preseason and into the season, Adebawore was playing between 268 and 275 pounds on the edge, right? So he had to make a decision. I mean, there could have been two pathways to his valuation, right? It could have been, I'm maybe even going to slim down a little bit, maybe play edge at 267 to 270 pounds from that ballpark, or, which is, I think, the best case scenario that's happened this year, is to really understand and appreciate the fact that you become a good player on the edge at 270 pounds, or you could become a game changer, a game wrecker at 280 plus pounds on the interior. Because the thing about him is, too, Joe, is like there's not bad weight on him either, man. Like he is a ball of muscle when you walk past him. So having that type of profile with the length, explosiveness, physicality, power, all those things together, I think that Adebawore has made himself a whole lot of money, especially since the season has ended.
Before we get to the next guy, you had dropped this tidbit when you were in Indianapolis for the Combine that there's potential for him to have pushed himself into the late first round conversation. Do you still think that is possible just from some of the things that you were hearing?
Just based on testing, Joe. I mean, honestly, like there is a really thin line between the guys that are the Combine warriors and the guys that are just really good on film but maybe aren't great testers, right? Like there's a very fine line between figuring that line out. I think Adebawore has good film, though. And then at the end of the day, the NFL is going to lose their marbles for a guy that ran 4.49 at 280 plus pounds. You can talk yourself into, as a defensive line coach, that even though he still has a transition to make full time, even though he's not a finished product on the interior, that if I can't work, if I'm a coach and I'm saying, if I can't get the most out of that kid, then I suck. I'm a bad coach, right? Like you look at that kid and say, that is my meal ticket. If I figure that out, you know, I'm not going to say he's going to be Aaron Donald, but like he should be a substantial producer as an interior rusher. He should be a playmaker at the next level. There's no doubt about it. So I do think he has a chance to go in the late first round. If not, I would be absolutely shocked if Adebawore got out of the top 50 picks. And at the end of the day, man, we have literally just never seen a player at 280 plus pounds running in the 4.4s, verticaling the way he did, broad jumping the way he did, doing everything that he did, man. He is about as rare of an athlete as you're going to find at that position.
Yeah, Adebawore is a gem potentially in this class. Another guy I think fits that description of who you said, where coaches are going to say, if I can't coach this guy up, then I suck as a coach. Lucas Van Ness, who's the Iowa edge rusher, he has been a perplexing story because he wasn't even a starter at Iowa. We know that they prioritize starting upperclassmen, so he's a rotational player for the most part at Iowa, but for the reps that he got, he was a problem maker. He has all the length, all of the size that you want in a 4-3 defensive end. He is a massive hulking guy, and you get the comments like his teammates calling him Hercules and all that goofy stuff. But he tested very well at the NFL Combine. He is a name that before the Combine, we just saw a random rapid surge to the point where wasn't really on the radar. And then now he's a top 10 pick. I would argue that that's a bigger surge than Adebawore.
Yeah.
Adebawore is a little more random because he's coming from Northwestern. But to see somebody go from no relevancy to now being a top 10 pick, that's a pretty massive rise in draft stock.
He is a very interesting player because, you mentioned a couple of the backstory stuff, right, Joe? Like 2021, he's playing a lot of defensive tackle because he was just too talented not to get on the field in some capacity, right? And then he plays a lot more on the edge this year, but he's never started a football game in his Iowa career, He was a hockey player growing up, apparently, and his team calls him Hercules because of the 8-pack that he has at 270 pounds. He goes to the combine, man. I thought he had a really weird kind of workouts down in Mobile because, I mean, he tested phenomenally overall, but I expected him to be kind of a short area burst guy and maybe not have like great 40 time and all that great stuff, right? But he has a tremendous 40 time. He runs a great 3-cone. He has a great short shuttle, and his jumps aren't great, which is a little bit different. Like I expected him to be kind of this speed to power explosiveness guy. But then he shows like, hey, maybe he's got a little more twitchiness, a little more range as a football player than people maybe that Iowa highlighted, I think is the best way to put it. And he's a young cat, a guy that's had production certainly in the time he's got. And I've seen comps all over the place of Aaron Campman that used to play with the Green Bay Packers, Chris Long that was a really good defensive end, obviously, for the Philadelphia Eagles, before that with the then St. Louis Rams. He's just an impressive athlete, man. He's another guy, to your point, that if I'm a defensive line coach, I'm saying that length, that athleticism, that physicality, I got to get the most out of him, right? And I will say this too, it's not just all projection with him. Because his game against Ohio State this year, for people that haven't seen Lucas Van Ness, he gave Paris Johnson the best game of all season as far as most wins against Paris Johnson. Like he took Paris Johnson to the woodshed a couple times, man, with that ability to convert speed to power. So he's a little raw in the sense that he hasn't played a ton on the edge as that true edge setter. But man, the traits are there for a guy like Lucas Van Ness, and it's just about getting into the right situation with the right coaching staff and really, honing in on that profile he has, because he has special traits as a football player.
Yeah, I think that Van Ness, the game that you pinpointed, is the perfect one to highlight that I believe put him on the radar, because so many people were going back and watching Paris Johnson tape, and you think to yourself, like, oh, let's flip on the Iowa game. They have some pretty good defensive linemen. And that was the case for me. And you really got those flashes of what Van Ness can do as a player. Yep. The length, the power, maybe not as explosive as we thought, as you mentioned, but still a pretty good athlete. I also argue what makes somebody like Van Ness exciting, and this is the age-old debate that I believe us as draft nerds and maybe the outside public or other media individuals, that the debate we get into, and it's going to be for a guy that we're going to talk about in a second, of do you take the younger player who's less proven but has way more upside and athleticism, or do you take the older player that's maybe a little more developed, closer to their ceiling, but has a lower ceiling? And I think that a lot of teams look at somebody like Van Ness, who is a younger guy from Iowa, is a younger prospect compared to a Tyree Wilson, for example, from Texas Tech, who's also been a riser but did not make our list.
Yep.
Him being younger, I think a lot of teams are going to put stock in that and say, man, if he's where he is right now, imagine when he's 23, 24 years old and his body's fully developed. I think that's one thing that doesn't get brought up enough when we talk about these prospects. Yes, there is physical development for players from freshman year to junior year when they're playing college football. But as adults, guys don't finish growing and developing and adding strength at 22 years old. A lot of them continue to get in better shape up until 26, 27 sometimes. So I think Van Ness is the perfect example of that, of young, talented player that a lot of teams, as you mentioned, are going to be ecstatic to have the opportunity to work with.
Two things that the analytical side of the community focus on a lot, Joe, is the age that you're talking about, right? That age thing is a big conversation. And the other thing is testing. And me, I push back on a lot of both of those areas sometimes. I think age is a little bit over. I think that's a little bit over talked about at times, because that doesn't really tell you what the experience level is of a football player and where their development pattern has been. Like, I think you lose context with that. And I think you lose context with the testing sometimes too, because there's just some kids that just aren't good testers, man. Like, there's just some of those guys that are really good football players that aren't great testers. But I will say this, one position that I do tend to agree with both those things more than most is at edge. It really is, man. Like, I think age does matter. I think that athleticism at the edge position, that testing, those testing numbers, they translate a lot for me. Those really do, because you have to think about it, man. The edge position now, when you're playing against the offensive tackles in today's games, like the Lane Johnsons of the world, the Teron Armsteads, the Tristan Wirfs, like these kids that are just built on different planets. I mean, we now have 300 plus pounders that are running 4.7 in the 40. Like, it doesn't make any sense, right? So be able to counteract that and to beat those players and increase space, you need to be a gifted athlete. And that's what Lucas Van Ness is, man. At 6'5", 270 plus pounds, the ability for him to run sub 4.6, to have the type of short area quickness that he showcased in Indianapolis, those things are traits that you bet on. So I anticipate him going a lot earlier than maybe some people think. Top 10 I think is possible. Top 15 I think is certainly possible. Top 20 I think is almost a lock at this point. Because at the end of the day, man, there's just not a lot of guys that are walking around with that type of profile on the earth.
Ryan, we all know that this is the Anti-Analytics podcast.
Yes.
This is the Film Bro podcast where we only watch film. So don't ever bring up analytics again.
Van Ness also has good film, so he matches both areas, sir.
Film. That's all we care about is film.
Joe.
Our first faller to bring up on this. So again, I said this at the top of the show. It's perspective of the whole draft cycle. And the whole draft cycle is the beginning of the college football season. Anyone who's paid attention to our work knows that we start our homework during the summer for the upcoming class. And one guy
You're wrong. I'm starting my work for 2024 in about a week and a half. So you're very wrong about this, man. Sorry, guy.
You're such a tryhard. One guy who was brought up almost unjustifiably, but a lot at the beginning of the season as somebody who was going to take that next step was Eli Rix, the Alabama defensive back who transferred from LSU.
Yeah.
And I was talking about this on another show, actually specifically about Rix, why I felt that it was fitting to include him on this, is that oftentimes guys will transfer and then on top of that will have productive seasons and a lot of season accolades. That's what puts them on these preseason rankings lists. That's what gets them on this list.
Yep.
And as you watch the film, you get more context. What we saw from Eli Rix and what I saw from him in the preseason was a stiff player, one that has physical flexibility limitations that are going to prevent him from being a first-round pick. So that already dropped him for me. And I think that a very up and down year at Alabama where he wasn't at times even a full-time starter. Like there were times where he was getting rotated in and out. There were some thoughts and speculation on why that was happening. But Eli Rix, man, is he a day 3 pick at this point? He is somebody who was almost a guaranteed lock to be a top 15 pick, it felt like, at a period of time. And he's now dropped to where he's probably going to be a day 3 selection. Especially because of all the other guys at this point in the process that have pushed up ahead of him, like Joey Porter Jr., like Christian Gonzalez, like Keely Ringo, like Devon Witherspoon. There's so many guys that have moved up ahead of him, and Eli Rix seems to have stayed the same.
He's a weird player. He's a really weird player. I mean, I remember his freshman year in 2020, I guess it was, right? The COVID year.
Yeah.
He looked good. Like, there looked like there was a ton of upside. I know he's a former 5-star recruit, so, like, no one should be shocked that Eli Rix did some nice stuff early on in his career at LSU. Playing opposite of Derek Stingley that year as well. 2021 was very up and down. 2022, there's just not a lot of film to work off of. I mean, there's some good Alabama film out there, but it's not a ton, man. Like, it's just not enough. And ultimately, Joe, like, I just think there's some limitations with Eli Rix. I think people get excited about the 6'1", good length, and sure, I get that. But I just think that he's a guy for me that always worries me making the transition to the next level because he's a little bit grabby. And I don't think he's a great athlete. I think he's a good, solid athlete, but I think that he does struggle to counteract the guys that can really take the top off the defense. Like, I think he does struggle with that a ton. So I look at a guy like a Eli Rix and I just say, man, that's a day 3 dart throw. That's what he is, Like, maybe it's early day 3, maybe it's mid day 3. I'm not exactly sure where he comes off the board. Ultimately, though, I don't think you take this kid in the first 3 rounds just because I don't think that he gives you a clear answer on what his upside is. Because if this was a young man that just had lack of film but had incredible physical attributes, I would be like, okay, I can take a gamble on that type of kid earlier.
Well, that's like Joey Porter. That's what Joey Porter is in this class, and some of these other guys, and Christian Gonzalez, is that maybe there are some inconsistencies, but they are very explosive athletes, and that's why they're up in the first round conversation, and Rix is not.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think when we talked about him in the summer, I think I said that he was scheme specific, and I still agree with that. Like I think that this is an off zone type of corner that I think he just lacks the traits to be a man-on-man cover guy. So interesting decision for him to declare for the 2023 NFL draft after not playing a ton. But I think guys like Kool-Aid McKinstry, and they have Terrian Arnold is the other corner, I believe, right? Like the younger guy that, I think that reps were going to be tough for Eli Rix to come by consistently next year at Alabama. So I think writing was on the wall.
Was Rix even a combine invite? I don't see combine numbers for him, but
I don't think he tested. I think he was invited.
Oh, he was. Yeah, he's got the no bowl gear on in his picture, but he doesn't have any testing. 6'2", though. It's good.
And there's usually a reason that people don't test at the combine, Joe. There's usually a reason.
Usually you're either hurt or just a really bad athlete. You know who's not a bad athlete that should have been off the top, the biggest riser so far, is Anthony Richardson, who has continued to be the most controversial name to bring up.
Is this your favorite player? Is this your favorite player of the class? It might be, man.
I love Anthony Richardson because he's so explosive. He's 6'4", he's 244. He runs the 4.4, 440. Say that 3 times fast. He has the 40-inch vertical. He's so explosive. He's got a huge arm. I understand there's stuff that we need to work with. But you want to know why I love him, Ryan?
Why?
And it's one of the reasons that you and I tend to disagree on content styles. Is I love hyping him up because it pisses everybody off.
Joe, that's not...
Anthony Richardson pisses everyone. It's funny to me, though. It's just, there is no in-between. Like, separate from that, though, Ryan. Yeah. There is no in-between with Anthony Richardson. He is the most volatile evaluation. But I think those that appreciate traits, like we talked about at the top, understand what Anthony Richardson brings to the table. And we've said it a million times on this show, is that he is... Yes, he is green, but I would argue he is more inexperienced than he is underdeveloped. He needs more reps. He just needs to get on the field more. And I think that an athlete that good, that looks natural, but still learning how to properly play the position with only 10 games under his belt, Anthony Richardson has all pro written all over him. And again, it is always going to be the age-old debate of like, do I take this traitsy kid who has no proven results? Am I going to get fired? Possible. It's very, very possible. But it's worth risking for a guy like Patrick Mahomes in my eyes, who fits this description.
Man, Patrick Mahomes was pretty dang good at Texas Tech, though, man. Like, he was pretty
he was good. Boomer bust is what a lot of people considered him to be.
Yeah, I get it, man. I get it. Look, I'll say this, Joe. I'll say this about Richardson. And I've talked about this on the radio, I feel like 97 times since the combine got over.
He's getting asked to me, too.
Man, I expected Anthony Richardson to test really well at the combine. What I said, I'd be lying if I said that I thought he was going to be the greatest tester in quarterback history at the combine. Like, that would be a lie, right? That part would be a lie. So it's impressive. But nothing Anthony Richardson did at the combine changed my opinion on him at all. It didn't. Like, he's a great athlete. I thought like you saw during the throwing session of the combine that there were some really great moments, and there were some that you're just like, you can't throw a 10-yard out inside, brother. Like, that's a pick six, And so like those inconsistencies, I think you coined it perfectly, is the fact that he is a volatile player, but not a volatile player just based upon what people's opinions are of him. I think that there are two real realities for Anthony Richardson that people need to understand. It's okay to be really excited about him, because I am. I'm very excited about him. If he lands in the right system, I think he could be a superstar. No exaggeration. I think he could be a superstar. But there is another reality. If he lands in the wrong situation, he could get a GM fired in a couple years.
Yes.
That's the facts, right? So either he can make a coach and a general manager look very good, or he can make them look like they don't deserve a job anymore. Like, I don't think there's much in between, man. This is a boomer. This is a boomer bust prospect. I don't think anybody can question that his upside is phenomenal. But the fact of 1-year starter, sporadic production, a guy that only has 10 starts under his belt, that usually doesn't work out at the NFL level. It usually doesn't. Does it mean it won't? No. But if Anthony Richardson is successful, he would be a little bit of an outlier. From the production perspective, from the experience perspective. I agree that he needs to play. He needs to see live bullets, in my opinion. But the problem is that if you're drafting high, usually you're not a good football team. So some general managers, their job might be on the line, right? So like, do I have time to give Anthony Richardson that much leeway to get better, to get better, to get better? That's why situation matters so much. I like Anthony, but I think Anthony would even say himself that situation is going to be very important for my development. It's very important for him.
The way that I see this to fit that description of either get somebody fired or is going to be the reason why they get a big raise in a contract extension. I see a team like the Oakland Raiders, that's their demise. That's Anthony Richardson's demise. That is Josh McDaniels' demise, because let's be honest, he is not the best developer of quarterback talent. He is also not the best nurturer of quarterback talent. He is going to need a veteran. That's what that situation needs. But I think the counter to that, I look at, and I don't know if they're going to pick a quarterback, but I think that the Lions or the Seahawks are the perfect situation for Anthony Richardson, because both teams have veteran quarterbacks with contracts, and Geno Smith just got a new contract that leaves a 3-year window for Anthony Richardson to do his thing, develop, and then let Geno go off into the sunset at 35 years old, and he's probably going to be at the end of his career at that point. Let's be honest. Geno Smith is not somebody who physically is going to get better at the age of 35. So for a team like the Seahawks that has been gifted an opportunity to pick in the top 10, and the Lions here to pick in the top 10 because of them getting those massively lucrative trades, I think that those are the teams that need to take advantage of it. But I just don't know if that's going to happen. And I don't think that that's going to happen because someone stupid like the Raiders is going to draft him off of excitement.
That was who we gave him to in the mock draft, right? Didn't we give him to the Raiders? I thought so. Yeah, because then we gave Will Levis to the Falcons, right? So I'm like 98% sure
think
that's
so.
True. Yeah. Yeah.
Prayers up for Anthony Richardson if he ends up at the
I'm about 98%.
Yeah, number
sure.
7, Anthony, and 90. Yep, you're 100%. Prayers up to Anthony Richardson if you end up on the Las Vegas Raiders.
Yeah, man. I mean, yeah, but I mean, it again, man. Like, I'm not trying to harp on the same points again, but I mean, yeah, the Lions would be a great situation for him. But the Lions, I think, are also in a position where you're going into the third year under Dan Campbell. They probably want to try to get into that winning window here very shortly, right? And that defense is bad. The defense is a bad unit right now. So they probably balk on quarterback this year, in my opinion. Maybe they take someone day 2, like maybe they take a Hendon Hooker in like second or third round to develop per se or something like that. But I think that they might balk a little bit. The Seattle Seahawks is a good situation because Pete Carroll is so entrenched there that if they have a bad season, let's say, like, it's fine. It's Pete Carroll. Like, you're good, man. Like he has done so much in his Seahawks career that you look past a bad year or two. Like, you can look past those things. And I think that most people, like, the reason that Geno Smith ended up getting a kind of a base of $25 million a year after the signing bonus and everything is because, like, I think the Seahawks believe in Geno Smith as far as what he did this past year. But I think you also understand that, like, this guy was a journeyman before he had this great year, right? So, like, there's a possibility that he ends up not being the guy in a year or two type of thing. So I think that the Seahawks would be a good situation. I just really hope that whoever drafts Anthony Richardson has a clear understanding of what they need from him early on, right? Because it could be sink or swim time for him early on if you throw him into the fire, and not every quarterback has the resolve to fight through that adversity. And I'm just very curious to see how it works out for Anthony.
We will see how that one turns out. Ryan, our next faller that we've got is Jordan Battle, another Alabama defensive back. So the interesting thing with Jordan Battle is I remember at one point in the previous cycle, the Alabama safety was considered to actually last year be a late first-round pick. There were debates of if this kid declares he is going to be amongst the top safeties selected.
From the media. Make sure you say that. From the media side, yes.
He decides to go back, and I think that when we evaluated him, I was still understanding of why he could fit as a late first-round pick, early second-round pick. Like, I thought there was a lot to work with. He's a very smart player. He's a very wily veteran, if you will, because he's played a lot of games, and he's playing under a great defensive back coach in Nick Saban. But the way that the process works out is the Jordan Battle stayed the same. He didn't improve. He didn't progress. So him returning for another year doesn't do him any benefit. And as we know, what have you done for me lately? We've got some other guys I think that have maybe pushed themselves up ahead of him. In general, this safety class is not that sexy. It's not that good of a group. Like, I don't even know who is. There's not even really a first round safety on the radar now that JL Skinner's hurt.
Brian Branch.
Yeah, Brian Branch is possibly on the radar. I think most of those guys are going to go in the second round for the first grouping of safeties. So someone like Jordan Battle, I don't feel like he's brought up at all. He went to the Senior Bowl. He had a really quiet Senior Bowl and has not been a name that we have discussed very much lately.
I think that this is a situation where I think the media hype and what the NFL actually thought are kind of like meeting a little bit here, because I think that the media definitely likes Jordan Battle more than maybe the NFL likes Jordan Battle. And saying that, I still think that someone's going to like Jordan Battle on day 2. Like, I still think that's going to happen because he is very smart. And he actually tested a little better than I thought, Joe. I think he ran like 4.5, 6 or something like that at his size. I'm like, all right, that's fine. Like, pretty solid tester for what his profile is kind of a solid but unspectacular athlete. And I do think, though, that he's going to be a quality football player at the next level. I think he could be a starter relatively early in his career because I think he does have a high floor. I think more than just the the faller element of this conversation, though, is that maybe the media was higher on Jordan Battle early on in the process than what the NFL was. And I think that those two things are just kind of meeting right now. Still a good football player, still rock solid, just maybe not the star that he was kind of portrayed early on in the process.
Well, the funny thing, too, with Jordan Battle and the correlation that we can pick up between him and Eli Rix, again, I'm telling you guys right now, our listeners, when we start talking about the 2024 cycle, go look at the preseason 2024 early watch list, and there's going to be a bunch of Alabama DBs on it. It's just one of those things that we do where we always put Alabama defensive backs on these lists because we know that they are, for the most part, pro-ready, and they're usually in the discussion. Just like at one point, a lot of Ohio State DBs were also being propped up and put in these conversations. I would say,
what happened to Ohio State defensive backs, man, the last couple of years? Hasn't been.
I blame Ryan Day for that, man. I blame Ryan. But Ohio State wide receivers is another cliche. Georgia defensive lineman is another cliche, and it's just part of the process. It always happens where there's one school that we just end up throwing guys into the mix. And I don't think we properly do our due diligence. But Jordan Battle, still a good football player. I just don't think he lived up to that possible expectation that we had for him. One guy, though, that Ryan, dude, we both love, and that has been so fun to follow this draft class, but has been odd, is Will McDonald, the edge rusher from Iowa State. So we talked about this ad nauseum the entire season leading up to it. At the end of the season, Will McDonald is a tall, lean, twitchy, long edge rusher from Iowa State.
Yep.
And he played in a 3-3 stack where he was asked to play head up, hand in the dirt as an outside rusher, as a guy who's supposed to contain the edge. And he's not built like that. This is not a 280-pound 3-4 defensive end that is supposed to be holding the edge the way that he was asked to do it. He is going to play a different role in the NFL. He is going to be a stand-up rusher. He has all of the ability to be a stand-up outside linebacker. But the thing that makes, I think, him very promising is that despite him being asked to play a different role, and this gets brought up a lot, and I think there's so much truth to it, the guy did really well for what he was asked to do at 240 pounds. For as light as he was, he managed to hold his own at a position that usually requires 40 to 50 more pounds to play. That's why I'm excited about Will McDonald. And as he has transitioned and showcased his athleticism at the NFL Combine and at the Senior Bowl, he has to be brought up as one of the biggest risers, as maybe even a mid-first round pick at this point.
I mean, yeah, Joe, Will McDonald is a really fascinating player because of the simple fact that he's not going to be asked to do anything of what he did at Iowa State. You're correct. I mean, he wasn't even 240 pounds. He was listed in last spring at 226 pounds when NFL scouts came in and measured him. So he's playing that 4-eye type of role at probably around 230 pounds during his career, which is just absolutely wild, man. And like you said, he did a very good job of doing it despite not being built that way. But then you see at the Senior Bowl, he's used more as that stand-up rusher, wide nine alignments, that type of work. Because this is a true outside track pass rusher. At 6'3", and Nero 6'4", 241 pounds. I think he was 239 at the combine. He has an 11-foot broad. I think it was 36 inches in the vertical, which is actually not what his goal was, because he was a 6'10" high jumper coming out of high school, and he was obviously sick coming into that combine workout, so he ended up not running.
A flu game, man.
Yeah. Well, man, he's a special mover, man, and he's got length for days, almost 35-inch arms. He's probably going to run somewhere in the 4.5s in the 40-yard dash when he tests at the pro day. Kid's a freak show. And the thing that makes him different is he's a true outside track rusher in a class that doesn't have a lot of true outside track rushers. There's a lot of power rushers in this class, not a lot of true outside track kids. With his ability to bend around that corner, reduce rush angles, this kid, I think, can be special at the next level. I think it's a double-digit sack artist. I think that he has a lot of upside as that stand-up rusher. Will McDonald has all the goods to be a really good football player at the next level.
Yeah, I love what Will McDonald has done during this process, and he's somebody that we continue to bring up. The testing is the silly part that we know is just a crazy explosive athlete. To flip it to our last faller that we've got, let's see if we've got time to also get one more riser in on today's show. Andre Carter, another edge rusher who at one point was actually considered to be drafted ahead of Will McDonald.
Yeah.
He's the edge rusher from Army, who at one point was almost not in this draft class because of a bill that was passed, and that's completely above my head of understanding of all that stuff, but he's still able to be a part of this NFL draft class. He's still able to pursue his NFL career. He participated at the Senior Bowl, and at the beginning of this season, everyone was talking about how this could be the highest drafted Army kid ever, and we talked about him on this show. He's got stupid length for a guy coming out of Army. He's a pretty flexible player, but as the season progressed, he's another guy who didn't take that step forward and then shows up at the Senior Bowl and is non-existent. There were some flashes, but for the most part, I thought got bullied a bit by some of these big, strong offensive tackles that he had to face off against.
Yep.
And then on top of that, one of the more pedestrian combines that we've got. And I don't know if it's a weird take, but the strength and conditioning at a place like Army is going to be different than it is at even somewhere like Memphis. It's just, I don't know if it's natural to prepare a guy like Andre Carter for the NFL. And now I don't even know if he's a day 2 pick. To be completely honest, I think that he has done enough to push himself into the day 3 conversation after all these other guys are popping up ahead of him.
I don't think anybody can take a shot on this kid until late day 3, Joe. Like, I don't think you can take a chance because, I mean, he was built off of being a trait C pass rusher in the preseason. That's what we loved, 6'6.5", 256 pounds, nearly 34-inch arms, over an 82-inch wingspan. Like, this kid has the look. But then he comes to the combine, man, and I mean, some of these numbers are terrible. Like, let's just call it what it is. It's not even that they're not good or they're pedestrian. Like, they're bad. There's some bad numbers as an edge rusher. I mean, he had, I believe it was 30-inch vertical, 9.1 in the broad. I mean, explosive numbers were bad. He didn't run the 40. He ran a pedestrian 20-yard shuttle. And not to mention, man, he only had 11 reps on the bench. And I know he's got longer arms, but 11 reps at 2.25 at 256 pounds, that's a bad number, man. It's just a bad number. And when you look at all the numbers kind of combined, bad combine, Senior Bowl, there was like a couple flashes, but otherwise he was kind of getting dominated, especially in the run game as far as being able to counteract physicality. He's a bendy kid. He's got ability, but he is an ultimate like day 3 dart throw at the end of the draft and hope that you can stash him on a practice squad for a year. Like, that's what you really want out of an Andre Carter. You want to build in that frame. You want to add strength. You want to make sure that he's in a proper strength and conditioning, plan and all that great stuff, right? With a good staff, and practice with him every single day. Get some nuance to himself as a pass rusher. Add tools to the toolbox. This is the ultimate developmental prospect at the end of day 3. It's been a disastrous process so far for Andre Carter.
Ryan, last guy here to wrap up the show very quickly.
Yeah.
Deontay Banks from Maryland, who I tweeted this out. Maryland has had some of the most stupid athletes that they have recruited, but have produced quite literally no results. They have not had any production at all from Maryland. But Deontay Banks, man, dude, he had a really great combine. And he's somebody who hasn't been on the radar. And he's a good example of test well at the combine. We'll go back and watch the film because we weren't even thinking about considering you. And he just made the back end of our first round mock draft.
Yeah.
I think it's possible. I think that this kid could go in the end of the first round as after all these other guys go, because there could be a quick early run on DBs, and somebody needing a DB to round out their roster might pull the trigger on a Deontay Banks.
Well, it was like 2 or 3 weeks before the combine, Dane Brugler had put in a mock draft that he was in the first round, and people were just kind of like, I mean, because Dane Brugler is incredibly plugged in at The Athletic. He's a very smart evaluator. He's the best in the business, in my estimation. And you're just kind of like, I didn't really know anything about Deontay Banks. And he was obviously a Richard Jr. that declared early, but 6 foot, 197 pounds, has 31 and 3/8 inch arms, so 31 and a half inch arms, good length for the position. I mean, Joe, he tested like an all-time athlete, man. 4.35 in the 40, 42-inch vert, 11.4 broad jump. I mean, those athletic testing numbers are just bonkers, man, for him. And, kind of building off of good film this past year with the type of upside he has, if Deontay Banks puts it all together, man, he's got special traits. I just think that we need to understand that, like, there is a little bit of a work in progress here. He still needs to develop. But, man, another gifted, talented height, weight, speed freak at the cornerback position, and we have a lot of them in this year's class, obviously.
A lot of them, and again, for some reason, a lot of them are coming from the University of Maryland. That's going to wrap us up on Joe DeLeone, Ryan Roberts. Folks, thank you for tuning in. We'll be back with more coming at your way. Enjoy the rest of your week.